Schopenhauer looked at existence and saw a blind, endless wanting, a wheel you run in forever, a universe of pure suffering with only one sane response: want less. Deny yourself, quiet the will, escape. And I told you, I loved half of it and wanted to fight the other half. Well, someone else read Schopenhauer and wanted to fight him too. A young man, 21 years old, wandering through a bookshop, who picked up The World as Will and Representation and was hit so hard by its darkness that he later said it felt like the book had been written for him alone. He absorbed all of it, the wanting, the wheel, the suffering. And then he did something Schopenhauer never dared to do. He looked at the exact same abyss. He agreed the old comforts were dead, that there was no cosmic meaning waiting for us, that the wheel of wanting was real. And instead of saying, escape it, he said, dance in it. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and I need to tell you something before we start, because it's the whole reason this video exists. Nietzsche is probably the most famous philosopher of the last 200 years. He's also, by a wide margin, the most misunderstood. Almost everything the average person thinks they know about him is wrong. That he was a nihilist, wrong. That he was a proto-Nazi, badly, offensively wrong. That God is dead was a triumphant atheist boast, wrong. That he preached power and cruelty and the strong crushing the weak, wrong. And it's a lie that got a lot of people killed. So this video is a rescue mission. We're going to take the real Nietzsche back from the people who stole him, including, as you'll see, his own sister. And at the end, I'm going to show you why, out of all 5 philosophers in this series, Nietzsche might be the only one who could look at your phone, your feed, your whole scrolling life, and tell you something the others couldn't. Let's get into it. And fair warning, this one's personal for me. He's my favourite. Let's start with something you'll notice the second you try to read him. Nietzsche doesn't write like Kant or Hegel. There's no system, no neat progression from metaphysics to ethics to politics, each part locking into the next. Instead, you get fragments, aphorisms, poetry, a prophet named Zarathustra wandering down a mountain, jokes, insults, sudden bursts of music. And a lot of people take this as a knock against him. See, he's not a real, rigorous philosopher, he's just a guy writing pretty lines. I want to kill that idea right now, because it gets him exactly backwards. Nietzsche didn't fail to build a system, he declared war on the whole idea of systems. Think about who came before him: Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and finally Hegel, usually called the last great system builder. For over 2,000 years, philosophy assumed there was one big truth out there. Call it the forms, call it reason, call it God. A single fixed reality that a proper system could map. Nietzsche's entire life was an assault on that assumption. He thought that kind of truth, capital T, was itself a fiction, a comforting story the West told itself, propped up by Christianity and now quietly collapsing. So here's the thing people miss. You cannot attack the idea of the rigid system by building a rigid system. That would be self-refuting. Of course, the man who thinks truth is a fiction isn't going to write like the men who thought they'd captured it. It would be like demanding an abstract painter prove himself by painting a photorealistic bowl of fruit. When Kazimir Malevich painted a plain black square, it wasn't because he couldn't draw. It was a deliberate act, a rejection, a demolition, a clearing of the ground. Nietzsche is doing the same thing in philosophy. He's not a sloppy thinker. He's a demolition artist who happens to be one of the greatest prose stylists who ever lived, a trained classical philologist, a composer, a poet. He wrote in images and metaphors because he was trying to make you feel a thought, not just file it. And to understand what he was demolishing and why, You have to understand the two events that broke his life open when he was 21. Because with Nietzsche, more than almost anyone, the life and the philosophy are the same wound. 21 years old, two things happened to Nietzsche in the span of about a year, and both of them echo through everything he'd ever write. The first, we've mentioned, the bookshop, the Schopenhauer, the dark revelation that the universe has no built-in meaning. Hold that. The second is darker and stranger. Around the same time, Nietzsche visits a brothel and contracts syphilis, the disease that would, decades later, rot his mind and drag him into the madness he spent his final years in. Sit with the awful symmetry of that for a second. At almost the exact moment he encounters the idea that existence is suffering with no redemption, his own body is quietly infected with the thing that will eventually destroy his mind. The philosophy and the fate entering the same young man at the same time. And here's what makes Nietzsche Nietzsche, the thing that separates him from every gloomy edgelord who ever quoted him. Given that life, the meaningless universe and the slow bodily doom, he did not become a pessimist. He became the most ferocious life affirmer in the history of philosophy. This is a man who, even from inside his own hell, kept saying yes to existence, who despised suicide as a kind of cowardice, who took the exact same raw materials Schopenhauer used to build a monument to despair and built something wild and joyful instead. Now, to feel where he's going, I have to do something a little different, because Nietzsche believed you can't just argue your way to his philosophy, you have to feel it. So let me try to make you feel one piece of it before I explain a single concept. His closest friend for years was the composer Richard Wagner, and Wagner's music is enormous, thunderous, overwhelming, the kind of thing that doesn't sound like peace or resignation at all. It sounds like a storm, like something being destroyed and something being born in the same moment. When you hear it, you don't feel want less, retreat, be still. You feel the opposite. You feel power and struggle and a kind of terrible aliveness. Hold on to that feeling. Destruction and creation braided together, a storm you'd say yes to, because that feeling is the philosophy. Now let's give it words. Here's the most famous 4 words in philosophy, and almost nobody understands them. God is dead. People hear it as a smug atheist mic drop. Nietzsche, the great God-slayer, celebrating that religion is finished. That is completely, embarrassingly wrong. 2 things you have to get. First, Nietzsche isn't making an argument about whether God exists. He genuinely doesn't care, philosophically, about the metaphysics of it. He even says the point isn't whether God is real. It's whether people still believe. And look at how he actually delivers the line. It's not Nietzsche himself proclaiming it in triumph. It's a madman, a lunatic running through the marketplace with a lantern in the morning, screaming it at people who just laugh at him. There's something deliberately absurd and unsettling about the whole scene. This is not a victory lap, it's a horror story. Second, and this is the part that flips everything, God is dead is not good news to Nietzsche. It terrifies him. Because think about what the death of God actually means. It doesn't just mean a deity is gone. It means the entire foundation underneath Western morality, every notion of good and evil, right and wrong, meaning and purpose, all of it built on top of that religious bedrock for 2,000 years, has just had its floor pulled out. And most people, Nietzsche realizes, haven't even noticed yet. They've stopped truly believing, but they're still walking around on a foundation that's already crumbled, like a cartoon character who's run off a cliff and hasn't looked down. And when they do look down, that's the danger. That's nihilism. The terror of a world where nothing means anything, where every value has evaporated, where a person can no longer say why anything matters at all. So here's the correction that changes everything. Nietzsche is not the cause of nihilism. He's the one sounding the alarm about it. He didn't kill God. Christian culture, colliding with modern science, did that to itself. Nietzsche is just the messenger standing in the wreckage, pointing at what's coming, horrified. And this is why calling him a nihilist is so wrong. He wasn't nihilism's champion. He was its first and most frightened prophet, and he spent his whole life trying to find a way through it. Nihilism, for Nietzsche, isn't a destination. It's a moment you have to pass through. Like Descartes doubting everything not to end in doubt, but to get to the other side. Nietzsche passes through the collapse of all meaning in order to build something new on the cleared ground, which raises the obvious, enormous question. If God is dead and all the old values are rubble, what do you build instead? And this is where the real Nietzsche appears, and where the lies about him were planted. Here's the idea that got Nietzsche branded a monster: the will to power. On a lazy reading, it sounds exactly like what the fascists wanted it to sound like. Life is about domination, crushing the weak, seizing control, the strong ruling the weak. That reading fueled the Nazis, and it is a grotesque distortion. So let me tell you how the distortion actually happened, because it's one of the great crimes in intellectual history. The book called The Will to Power? Nietzsche never wrote it, not as a book. It was assembled after his mental collapse from his scattered notes by his sister, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was a fanatical German nationalist and anti-Semite, eventually an admirer of Hitler. She got control of her incapacitated brother's writings and edited them, arranged them, and shaped them to serve her own ideology. She turned her brother into a prophet for a movement he would have despised. Because here's what people don't know. Nietzsche loathed German nationalism. He loathed anti-Semitism, broke with Wagner partly over it. The man the Nazis put on a pedestal spent his life mocking exactly the kind of people who would later worship him. So what did he actually mean by will to power? Let me give you the real version. Remember Schopenhauer's will, that blind striving in all things. Nietzsche takes that and transforms it. He says, life isn't just striving to survive, it's striving to grow, to overcome, to become more. And the deepest form of that isn't conquering other people. As one great reader of Nietzsche put it, the will to power isn't about dominating, it's about creating. The highest expression of power is the power to create, to make values, to make art, to make yourself. The clearest proof that this was never about race or biological superiority. Nietzsche's own examples of higher human beings weren't some master Aryan race. They were Greeks, they were the French, they were poets and artists and composers scattered across nations and centuries. There's no biological racism in the real Nietzsche. That was Elizabeth's forgery, painted over her brother's actual words. The real will to power is the storm from the Wagner, the force of destruction and creation, the engine that tears down the dead and builds the living. And to show you what a human being fully running on that engine looks like, Nietzsche reaches back to ancient Greece and to two gods. Nietzsche's favorite ancient insight was this: the Greeks understood human nature better than anyone who came after, and they captured it with two gods. Apollo, the god of order, reason, measure, form, boundaries, the clean, rational, structured side of us. And Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, passion, chaos, intoxication, the dissolving of boundaries, the wild, instinctive, creative, dangerous side. Here's the crucial part. The Greeks didn't pick one and condemn the other. They didn't treat Dionysus as sin to be crushed. They held both, Apollo and Dionysus, in constant tension, and out of that tension, a full human being. They even had festivals for Dionysus, days of release, of ecstatic theatre, where people purged exactly the passions a respectable society tells you to bury. The Greeks knew you need both halves, and then, Nietzsche says, Christianity came and murdered Dionysus. It took half of human nature, the passionate, instinctive, bodily, creative half, and rebranded it as sin, shameful, something to be repented, restrained, escaped. We were taught to be ashamed of the wildest and most alive part of ourselves. In Hegel's language, which fits perfectly here, we became alienated from our own nature. cut in half and told the missing half was a disease. And why? Nietzsche's answer is brutal and political. He calls Christian morality a slave morality. His claim is that it emerged historically from the resentment of the powerless. People who couldn't be strong, creative, or free, and so, unable to achieve those things, they redefined their own weakness as virtue. Humility, meekness, obedience, self-denial, turning the other cheek, these got recast as the highest goods. And the values of a vital, creative, self-affirming life got recast as sin. Weakness became virtue, strength became evil. And Nietzsche says this whole inversion served a purpose. It produced a docile population that wouldn't rebel, wouldn't overturn an unjust order, wouldn't dare create new values, because they'd been promised their reward in the next world. As he put it, the rich left the poor nothing but God. Suffer now, obey now, don't resist, you'll be compensated after death. Nietzsche looked at that and called it what he thought it was, a magnificent con designed to keep people asleep. But, and this is the part lazy readers destroy, Nietzsche is not saying, abolish all morality, do whatever you want, murder and cruelty are fine now. This is where I have to be careful, because it's the most dangerous misreading of all. If Nietzsche tore down Christian morality and all our ideas of good and evil came from it, doesn't that mean anything goes? Murder, cruelty, all of it permitted? No. And Nietzsche saw this objection coming. He wrote, and this is the line people always skip, that there are two ways to reject morality. One is to reject the idea that moral judgments rest on some absolute cosmic truth. That one, he says, he accepts. But the other meaning, to claim that we should therefore stop avoiding cruelty, stop resisting the things called evil, that one, he says flatly, only a madman would embrace. He explicitly says he is not rejecting that we should still avoid terrible acts. What he's demanding is that we learn to feel differently, to think differently, so that eventually we might build something better, not so we can descend into a bloodbath. So the morality Nietzsche wants to demolish is specifically slave morality, the life-denying, self-shaming, suffering is holy morality. What he wants to replace it with isn't chaos, it's a new way of creating values, one that affirms life instead of poisoning it. And this brings us to his answer, the figure who's supposed to live on the other side of the wreckage, the Übermensch, the overman. And here's where, once again, everyone gets it wrong. The Übermensch is not the blonde, Aryan Superman. That's Elizabeth's poison again. And it's not some transhumanist cyborg either. Nietzsche's own image for the Übermensch is the thing you'd least expect. Not a warrior, not a conqueror, a child. This is my favorite thing in all of Nietzsche, so let me slow down. In Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes three transformations of the spirit. First, the camel, the beast of burden, who kneels down and loads himself with all the weights society hands him, all the thou shalts, all the inherited values, and carries them dutifully across the desert. Most people live and die as camels, hauling a load that was never theirs. Then the camel becomes a lion. The lion's job is destruction, to fight the great dragon whose every scale reads, thou shalt, to say no, to tear down the old values, to win the freedom to create. The lion is the demolition. But, and this is the genius part, the lion cannot create new values. It can only clear the ground. Saying no is not enough. So the lion must become a child. Why a child? Watch what a child actually does. A child plays. And when a child is lost in a game, they don't need someone standing outside the game, above it, handing them the rules and the meaning. The child invents the rules. The child wills the game, lives the game, affirms the game, for its own sake, joyfully, with total innocence. The child builds a sandcastle for hours and then, bored, knocks the whole thing down and laughs and starts again, with no despair, because the creating was the whole point. That's the Übermensch, someone who can treat life itself like that child's game, inventing their own values, their own meaning, out of nothing but their own creative power, and affirming the whole thing with joy, needing no God, no cosmic script, no reward in another world to justify it. Someone loyal to the earth, to this life, this world, this body, instead of some promised world beyond. The overman is the meaning of the earth, Nietzsche writes. Not an escape from life, the fullest possible yes to it. And notice, this isn't a callback to Schopenhauer, it's a total reversal of him. Schopenhauer looked at the endless wanting and said, "Stop wanting, escape the game." Nietzsche looks at the same game board and says, "Become the child who loves the game so much they'd play it forever," which is, almost word for word, his final and strangest idea. Nietzsche has one last test for you, and it might be the most demanding thought in philosophy. He called it the eternal recurrence. Now, I don't think he meant it as a literal cosmological claim about time repeating. I think it's better understood as a kind of moral fable, a test, a thought experiment he built to hold your entire life up against. Here it is. Imagine a demon comes to you in your loneliest moment and says, "This life you've lived, every second of it, every joy and every humiliation, every pain, every boredom, this exact life down to the smallest detail, you will live again and again, infinitely, the same life, on repeat, forever, with nothing added and nothing removed." How do you react? Do you collapse in horror? Or could you say yes? Could you even crave it? That's the test. That's the whole thing. Nietzsche is asking, have you built a life you would be willing to live over and over for eternity? Because if the thought crushes you, it means somewhere you're still living like the camel, or still poisoned by a morality that made you ashamed of your own life. And if you could say yes, a joyful, wholehearted yes to this life, exactly as it is, forever, then you've become the child. You've affirmed existence completely, with no need for any world but this one. It's not a prediction about time, it's a hammer. You hold your life up against eternity and see whether it rings true or shatters. And now, finally, let's take this man, this demolition artist who wanted you to love your life enough to live it forever, and hand him a phone. Every philosopher in this series, I've asked what they'd make of Instagram, and I saved Nietzsche for last on purpose, because his answer is different from all of them, and I think it's the sharpest. Here's why. The others could diagnose the machine. Schopenhauer could show you the feed is an infinite wheel of wanting. Kierkegaard could show you it's the aesthetic life smothering your anxiety. Heidegger could show you it's the anonymous they eating your authenticity. All true, but they all treat the app as a kind of external trap that happens to you. Nietzsche wouldn't let you off that easy, because Nietzsche's entire philosophy is about one question. And it's the question that cuts straight through the screen. Are you creating or are you obeying? Watch what the feed actually is through his eyes. On one hand, scrolling looks Dionysian, impulsive, sensory, wild, endless stimulation. But Nietzsche would see instantly that it's a counterfeit Dionysus. Real Dionysian ecstasy is creative. It's a storm you generate. It makes you more alive. The feed is the opposite. A passive, consumed intoxication that leaves you emptier, that you didn't create, but only absorbed. It's the drug of Dionysus with none of the gods' creative fire. You feel stimulated and yet somehow more dead. That's not the storm, that's the anesthetic. But he'd go deeper, and this is the real blade. Remember the camel, the creature who loads itself with values handed down by others and calls it life. What is the feed, if not the greatest camel-making machine ever built? Every day it hands you a fresh load of thou shalts. This is what a good life looks like. This is what you should want. This is the body to have, the opinion to hold, the way to be. You didn't create a single one of those values. You absorbed them, at scale, by the thousand, from an anonymous crowd. And then you perform them back. Nietzsche looked at ordinary 19th century conformity and called it slave morality. A herd handing itself its values. The feed is that same herd, now algorithmic, now infinite, now in your pocket, whispering, "Thou shalt," 10,000 times a day. It is a factory for producing camels who believe they're being individuals. And here's the Nietzschean gut punch the other philosophers couldn't deliver. The feed doesn't just distract you. It quietly answers the eternal recurrence for you, and the answer is no. Because a life spent scrolling is precisely the life that, held up against eternity, makes you flinch. Nobody on their deathbed, asked if they'd live it all again forever, says yes, and please include the 4,000 hours I spent staring at the feed. The scroll is the single clearest example of a life activity you could never joyfully will to repeat. It fails the test completely. Every hour in it is an hour you're building a life you would not choose again. But, and I have to be fair to the man and honest about his blind spot, Nietzsche would also see something the pure critique misses, and it's the same generous point that kept coming up with the others. Because his real question isn't, is the phone good or bad? It's, are you creating or obeying? And that means the same device can go either way. The person mindlessly consuming the feed is the camel, but the person using it to make something, to create art, to build, to find the scattered few who help them become more themselves, to say their own yes. That person is doing something Nietzsche would actually bless. The tool is neutral. What matters is whether you're the child inventing the game or the herd animal being handed one. Nietzsche wouldn't tell you to throw the phone away. He'd ask you a harder question. When you pick it up, which one are you? This is the last philosopher in this series, so let me pull the whole thread together, because looking back, they were all circling the same fire. Every single one of them was standing in the wreckage after the death of God, asking the same question in a different voice. If there's no cosmic script, how do you live? Spinoza said, understand that you're part of something vast and necessary and find freedom there. Schopenhauer said, the wanting is unbearable, so escape it. Kierkegaard said, leap, stake your whole self on something, become an individual. Heidegger said, face your death and let it wake you into your own life. And Nietzsche said the boldest thing of all. He said, you are the one who makes the meaning now. There's no script, and that's not a tragedy. It's the greatest freedom and the greatest burden a human being has ever been handed. Stop waiting for the meaning to arrive from above. Create it. Be loyal to the earth. Build a life you'd live 10,000 times. And all 5 of them, I think, would look at the thing in your hand and see the same danger from 5 angles. A machine almost perfectly designed to keep you from doing the one hard, essential thing each of them, in their own way, begged you to do, to actually show up for your own existence. So I'll leave you with Nietzsche's question. because it's the one that's haunted me the most, and it's the right place to end this whole series. If you had to live your life over and over, exactly as it is, forever, could you say yes to it? And if the answer right now is no, then here's the only thing that matters. What are you going to have to tear down, and what are you going to have to create to change that answer?